much something that has improved in the last 3 years slightly, but not at a pace that's going to require real change.
Chris, you come from perhaps the whitest of sports with the one you've chosen to focus on. Tell us just things you've observed. You've written on this, you've researched this. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, hockey's a very interesting place to be, particularly as a Black man. And I think one of the pieces you're referencing, last year I did a piece for Hockey Graphs trying to identify where there are a lack of Black centers in the NHL. There's obviously a lack of Black players and a lack of diversity overall within the sport. But at the sport's most important position, there seems to be a distinct lack of players in that particular area. And so I actually did a lot of digging, got to talk to a lot of former players with help from Allison, obviously. So big thanks for that. But just understanding sort of how it got to be that once players of a certain caliber got to the professional ranks, they were sort of shut out of this sort of core position on the ice. When you think about what each team is trying to do, which is ultimately win at the end of the day, it seemed counterintuitive to have talented players not playing in the position that best maximize their talents. And so just going through that whole entire experience and seeing that no one had, really put a finger on the ball in terms of noticing the issue, and no one had really thought about it before when we dove into it. So it was just interesting to see that, like, had, it's entirely possible, had I not been in the space, that it would continue to be sort of underreported and underanalyzed. And so I think that just sort of reinforced to me the importance of having those diverse sort of voices at the table.
And speaking of that, I wanted to kind of break this into the different parts of this sports arena, and starting at the team level. We had Alex Mindricky from Seattle on yesterday. They've obviously built a very diverse organization, particularly for the sport of hockey. And she acknowledged, she said, it is hard to make sure you seek out a diverse field of candidates, because unfortunately there are barriers that come far before the time of getting a resume in the door and interviewing people. Sarah, maybe I'll start with you. If you could challenge front offices, I'm not asking you to share anything from your organization, obviously, but if you could challenge front offices for what they should be doing to make their hiring practices more diverse, and share any thoughts on barriers that we need to be looking at well before we're talking about sending in a resume for a job in sports analytics.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if a position opens, oftentimes, especially in the sport of football, there's a lot of nepotism, and I know, he knows, she knows kind of thing. So from my opinion, it needs to start there. And that, yes, of course, you can look within. There's often qualified people, but you should give people on the outside who haven't put their foot in the door a chance to, and open up the applications to everyone, instead of just automatically like, oh, this is my friend and they're good, so we're going to hire them, or I've known them for 20 years. So I think a big thing is just opening your candidate pool and really being intentional with the people that you're looking at and the resumes, and making sure that it's diverse. Like, yes, if you think about it, it's not everyone that's applying is going to be relatively qualified. So of course, qualifications are key, but if only 3 women apply out of 100, like, make sure you take a look at that. Or if like minority apply, like, it's going to be an unfair proportion that apply. And so instead of weeding out all those resumes, like, being more intentional in who you look at and trying to actively increase diversity, because then, if you follow that family rule, where I know, he knows, if you have more diverse people, then it's going to keep growing and building, because they might know someone and she might know someone. So I really think it starts with just opening that candidate pool up more.
And Sarah, this is something we've talked about before. There are so many narratives that feed into us getting to this lack of diversity. There's a storyline that women don't like science, women don't like math. Do you have thoughts on how we can grow that opportunity well before it's time to look at a resume?
I think that narrative is not true. I think women like math. I think we're told often from a young age, you're not encouraged in a tech world or in a sport world that, like, if you don't see women in there, it's not as realistic. I personally didn't think I would get a job in this. I liked math, and that was kind of the route I was taking, but I had a million backup plans, because sports was the goal and it was the ideal, but was it realistic? No, not at all. So I really think just like this kind of thing where you're getting more exposure, you're encouraging, there's clubs that that I've worked at, like sports analytics clubs that go in at the high school level and promote math and science at the high school level. And it's not a nerdy kind of, you don't have anything better to do and you just sit in your office. Like, math is cool. There's people out there that are doing really interesting things, and just promoting it in a different light, I guess, would help.
Erin, what thoughts do you have? I think a common pushback we've probably all seen is, we'll just hire the most qualified person, right? But again, how do we get to find diversity and qualified candidates before that resume perspective? And what would you challenge organizations to do in their hiring practices?
I mean, I think there's really two pieces of that. One is, what do we mean by qualified? Because the most qualified person for these jobs is not necessarily the person who has the most stellar resume as far as, building predictive models. Like, there's a lot more to the job than just the pure technical side of it. A lot of our job is communication. And, there's the intersect between people who are very, very solid technically and, mathematically inclined, and the people who are good communicators is fairly small. And that communication piece is so essential to what we do. I argue even more so than the technical side. Like, simpler work explained clearly is better than the most elegant model you've ever seen that you can't make actionable, that you can't explain, that you can't get buy-in from the stakeholders on. And so it's emphasizing more than just the on paper technical qualifications. And then, like Sarah said, just broadening the pool, looking in more places, not just going the traditional routes of seeking candidates. Look at some of the HBCUs, try to start up sports analytics programs there, start at the high school level. Like in Detroit, there was an organization called the Detroit Boxing Gym that I came across when they brought a bunch of students out to our practice facility when the NBA Math Hoops event was going on. And they were doing great work. They have they're called a boxing gym, so they obviously, boxing is a part of what they do, but it's more than that. They're getting kids interested in STEM subjects and trying to help them, like find other alternative careers that they may not have known about. And so getting involved with organizations like that and starting earlier, so that when that candidate pool, when you post a job, starts to become more diverse on its own, instead of, I've hired for a couple of jobs in my time working in the league, and you don't get a lot of minority applicants. Like, it's just, you get a lot of the same types of people from, the math and econ and computer science majors at a lot of elite schools. And they all look great on paper. And there's more people than there are jobs available. There's more qualified people than there are jobs available. But we're always talking in that very narrow definition of what we mean by qualified, and we've got to get more of those people in there. And I think a lot of people just don't even realize that these jobs exist still. Like, it's becoming there's more awareness around it now, oftentimes in a negative light, as this, the analytics versus eye test kind of debates that happen. But like, just the more we get people aware that those jobs are out there, then they're going to start seeking them out, and they're going to start taking the steps that they need to take, because it's not just, you can just say, I want to work in sports analytics, and then 6 months later, you're going to do it. It's going to take some preparation. And so, like, we've got to plant some of those seeds now so that we can build a broader pool for this. So 3-4 years down the line, it just happens naturally. And without us having to do anything, we're starting to see more minority applicants come in and more female applicants come in.
Awesome. Chris, I know you have some insight into some different interview processes. And just any additional thoughts that you have on this question of growing diversity and the organization's responsibility to do so, and how?
Yeah, I mean, I think both Erin and Sarah hit it perfectly. Like, it starts like well in advance. Like, if you want someone to be hired for a role, before the 2022 offseason, you need to start now, and sort of get on people's radar and do that. But I think it starts well in advance of that. I think one of the key things is, to me, it starts with just a difference of mindset. A lot of times when we talk about diversity, it's like, hey, we want to get the one woman in the room. We want to get the one, minority applicant in the room and stuff like that. And there's like, no, you need to hit a critical mass, first of all, because, in the places that I worked, I come from a tech background. I used to work in HR. You can hire people into a very unwelcome space. And then that person doesn't feel like this is a place that they want to be at anyway. So it's not just finding people to put in a pipeline, but setting them up to grow. I think the other key part is just, being very aggressive in terms of what a organization or a league or, overall, sports as an industry wants to do. Like, oftentimes it is, hey, we just need to get some, diversity in the door. And it's like, no, actually, you need to over index on the diversity that you've missed out on over the years. And so, if we are being very frank about it, if there's 50% of the population is women, then we need to have 50% of the analysts, sort of represent that as well, get as close to it as possible, which means a dramatic rethinking and how you approach that. That is going into high schools, going even earlier than that. I've talked about using video games and other avenues of introducing mathematics and analytics in ways that are maybe untraditional to people currently in the industry, but that resonate to the people that you're trying to reach out to. And so, that in addition to, as Aaron talked about, we actually talked in the past about, opportunities like working with HBCUs, doing sort of diversity focused analytics conferences, all that stuff. There's a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid, but once you start to get the ball rolling, then it sort of snowballs after that.
Awesome. This is a question, and it came to mind after Alex spoke on this yesterday. I don't know if any of you have thoughts. She shared that there are truly benefits of having that diversity. They've helped with decision making. To your point, Chris, women in the room, people of color in the room, other minorities in the room. Have any of you experienced, now we've seen some missteps, particularly in some marketing missteps, but have any of you experienced a situation where having a more diverse group involved helped in your job or in a previous job? Just throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, it's actually funny as I was thinking about it the other day. The whole concept of diversity. You hear a counterpoint where it's like diversity of thought, and this is actually what a lot of industries do when they don't have demographic diversity in the room. They have diversity of thought. They bring in consultants from McKinsey, so you get a Jeff Luna or whatever with the Astros coming in from other industries or who have seen it work at other companies and bring in a new set of eyes to solve a business problem. Like, this is something that companies are used to doing. They just don't know how to do it without paying a lot of money for it up front and bringing in someone else who has already done the work for them. And so you see it very often. I work for a very large retailer, and we bring in very expensive individuals from all different walks of life to help us solve the problems that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So it's like, you all understand what the impact of diversity, because this is what you're paying for. You just don't know how to replicate it organically within your organization, and do it in a way that, as I said, not only brings people in the pipeline, but allows them to flourish and grow. The dirty secret, you can see it, all the tech companies are being sued about the lack of progression and advancement for women and minorities at their companies, is because there's so much focus on getting people in the door that there's no real attention paid to like what happens when they get there. And it's the same thing with a prospect. Like, like I can draft the prospect, but I also need to develop them for them to reach their full potential. And if you don't do that, you're just sort of wasting resources. So I think that's something that, as I said, a mindset that has to change over time.
I love that point. Sarah, Aaron, any experiences where you've been able to see diversity really bringing additional value to a conversation or a decision?
I think similar to what Chris was saying, it's not only about getting people in the door. It's like you can have diversity at lower levels, but that really doesn't help someone come in when you see a bunch of like interns or newly junior analysts or whatever in those roles, because you don't have anyone to talk to, or to, if something happens where you feel uncomfortable maybe speaking to higher up that are not as diverse, like you don't have those people to reach out to. So from my perspective, like we've had the director of college personnel who just moved to Detroit with GM. He was a Black man, and he was in a position of power, and to see someone work their way up and be in a position that, like, even for me as a woman, that like I could go and talk to him and ask him certain questions that I might not be comfortable with in other realms, just because of the things that I know he's been exposed to and had to overcome, that he's shared and been very open about. So just having his open communication and people in the similar roles that they weren't trying to hide it, and they're in a position where they were comfortable and they were stable enough in their career where they could say that. Now, some of us in lower level positions, we can't say that, and you can't talk about certain things that aren't okay because you're afraid of losing your job, essentially. And you've seen that in not necessarily my personal experiences, but just you see that league wide, where either women or minority, they're struggling with who to talk to in situations. And I think by not only developing that diversity in the room, but having that diversity at the top, you get a little bit more hope that you can move up and that there's a future for you in the organization.
Erin, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I probably the most relevant one I can think of is actually from my past life as an actuary, and talking with another actuary, another African-American actuary, which is a very uncommon occurrence. When he went into a new company, and it was an auto insurance company, and without getting too deep into the weeds of what actuaries do, like a lot of what, in auto insurance is trying to figure out, the risk factors and how to price these different products and like what category, what characteristics of your insurers and everything. And what he realized in this meeting as they were discussing is, it's like, guys, what we're doing here with this way you're talking about pricing is you're sort of targeting on race without using race. And you're using these specific combinations of variables to sort of single out, these poor minority neighborhoods, and like whether or not you're trying to do that, it's what you're doing. And like, without his perspective of thinking about it in that way, like just everyone else in the room, he said, was just kind of surprised. It's like they didn't even realize it's what they were doing, and because they don't even think of things that way. They're not even conscious of like, hey, are we sort of using this as a proxy for charging Black people more? Like, and with, and there's just not, there's an association, the International Association of Black Actuaries. The meetings are not very big. There's just not many. It's not a very diverse career, not a very diverse field. So yeah, without someone like him being in the room, they may have just continued to do that and, and sort of unfairly target people based on race.
Sorry, very quick to piggyback on what Erin said. So it's funny. So when I logged on, I was like, so I was meant to get my hair done yesterday or whatever. Quarantine has not been nice to like bringing my barber in to cut my hair. And I was like, it's going to take me 4 hours, which I don't have, unfortunately, and my wife would have to do it. And then I saw Aaron, I was like, okay, he's letting this girl hang. Okay, I can do it too or whatever. And it's just like that, like, unseen acknowledgement of like, oh, there's somebody else in the room. Like I've been in places like I was like in finance before. And I've had a beard since I was 13, and they used to tell me like, there's nobody, on this trading floor that has facial hair. So you're going to need to decide between the 6-figure job or keeping your identity. I was like, well, I need the money. So, I cut my, I cut my beard or whatever, but it was like at the end of the day, now I'm at the point, as Aaron was saying, that I'm comfortable enough in my career where, someone's not going to come in and say like, oh, you need to look a certain way. You need to carry yourself with a certain demeanor to be taken seriously. I know the value of the work that I do and the abilities I bring to the table. And so therefore I can't be shut out of the room for things like that. It still may happen, but I'm not as concerned about it and worried and looking over my shoulder as I was even 3 or 4 years ago. So I, just like, as I said, seeing that just like reminded me of like some of the dynamics that come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I've seen the exact same thing, like I've changed jobs a few times across my career, and I have had, bosses and, higher ups and companies like, oh, well, if you're going to go start applying for jobs, you might want to get a haircut. And like, my hair's not that long. My hair's like 6 inches long or so. And I'm like, this is what my hair looks like if it's 6 inches long. If, if a white person was perfectly straight hair, had 6-inch long hair, it would just look like a normal, like, why can't I let my hair grow a little bit? Like, just because it looks different, like, that shouldn't be a concern at all. And like you said, I think that's better now. And like, it's funny, one of the jobs I went to, I actually knew someone who was at the company, and I said, I asked him like, look, are they kind of uptight? Do I need to get a haircut before I come and interview? And one of the top people in the office personally wrote back and said, if you couldn't have your hair like that working here, none of us would want to work here either. So like, luckily I was able to go work in a place with, like open-minded people like that. But yeah, but like, I think this is not necessarily a huge concern now, but that has been an issue in the past of just, you look different and people don't want that, they're just not open to people who look differently than them, and they just tend to hire people who look like them.
So we have some great questions in the chat, and I'd like to throw this one out because I'm sure that we have all either heard this or felt this, and it's kind of the flip side of that hire the most qualified coin. The question is, how do you feel about minorities or women not knowing if a company hired them because of their skill or because they just wanted to meet a diversity quota? I hear this narrative a lot. Anyone like to go first in a response?
I think one, you should be confident enough in your skills that if you're applying for a position, you deserve that position. Don't question it just because you're a woman, just because you're a different race. Like don't play that game. You're qualified, and they ultimately wouldn't hire you if you weren't. Most people, you still have to get the job done. You're not going to hold the job if you can't do it right and you're not qualified. So I think just obviously that's a thing that you can kind of like keep in the back of your head that's sort of there and you're wondering what's going on. Oh, there she goes. But at the end of the day, like believe in yourself, because you're never going to shut those ideas out completely. But if you do your job and you know you're qualified, like you're in the door. Just let yourself be there.
Aaron, any thoughts to add to that?
I would echo largely what Sarah said of just be confident in yourself, like be your own strongest advocate, and understand that, like, no, you got that job because you're qualified and you're good at what you do. Like, don't let, I mean, like, just in general, a lot of people tend to have some imposter syndrome, but don't let that creep in. And especially don't view yourself as any kind of quota or anything like that. I mean, if you got that impression from an employer, then like, even address it, but no, like, carry yourself, there's a quote I like to say, I like to use sometimes. It's carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. So believe in yourself and that you can do it.
Chris, anything additional there?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I've seen the dirty underbelly of many hiring processes, including with some sports teams and leagues. And I do know that does happen, but I would echo the sentiment that at the end of the day, you are talented. You are, someone is bringing you on because of what skills you bring to the table. And with that being said, for me, like I've had situations like that happen to me, and I called it out, to my superiors, and I've made a big fuss about it, about our hiring practices, so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, like to me, that was always like motivation. Like I'm not saying that you just have to take all the slings and arrows that come your way. If there's a toxic situation, like no one gives more of a darn about your career path than you do. So if you feel that this situation is not what's best for you, then definitely you don't have any loyalty to that company or that organization. But at the end of the day, like I've had many situations where I felt I had to prove myself, and work twice as hard to get half as far. And while it wasn't the most comfortable thing, like, that was what motivated me to get better at my craft, to get better at my skills. So that way I can go back to that person that says, I'm not here just because, I'm meeting some quota. I'm not your token hire. I'm the best person for the job. And I'll prove it to you every day until there's nothing left to prove.
Fantastic. Chris already talked a little bit about his study on the lack of Black centers in the hockey world. Aaron, I'll pose this question to you, and shifting away maybe from an organizational focus to a talent focus, the players that are in these organizations on these teams. Do we feel that we see an effect of lack of diversity in player evaluation, or even perhaps of someone like yourself who's coming in to say, I have thoughts on evaluating a player, if you don't look like, the standard old white man who maybe knows numbers or what have you, whatever their perception might be?
I think on the player side, and I mean, this pops up various ways and across different sports, like football in particular, like, where everyone wants to turn the Black quarterback into a wide receiver. Like players are perceived and described very differently. Similar players are described so differently just based on the color of their skin. Like the white guy is sneaky athletic. The Black guy is the physical freak. Like sometimes there's a Black guy who's not athletic at all and he's more sneaky athletic, and there are physical white freaks. Like, but we lump people into these stereotypes of like how they should play and like what their role is supposed to be. I don't think that happens necessarily as much in the NBA. It's a very heavily Black league. There is a tendency, if anything, in basketball, there's a tendency to just compare all the white guys to each other. Every shooter is compared to JJ Redick and Kyle Korver, when even those guys are different players, and like not many players play like them. But it's just that pigeonholing effect. And like, like certainly in hockey where there's very few Black players, like I'm not super familiar with the ins and outs of that. I'm interested now in reading Chris's work on the lack of Black centers. But I think that, in the NFL with the Black quarterbacks is like the most egregious one. And it's as a sports fan and Black person, it's infuriating to see how like they never want to believe in a Black quarterback. They have to be viewed as these athletic quarterbacks. Whereas like, no, sometimes there's just black pocket passers who are really smart, and like, let's not act like that's some weird anomaly. Like,
Sarah, that's an easy handoff to ask you for your feedback on that. And also, we have seen some of this in the NFL. There was a question in the chat asking about exposure to other minorities, such as sexual orientation, an out player. Just your thoughts, again, not asking for your organization, but your thoughts on, do you see diversity or lack of diversity affecting player evaluation, or the opportunity for maybe an out gay male to find a spot in a pipeline or on a roster?
I think in terms of evaluating, like, we try and do a good job here. I know some of the things Aaron said, you definitely hear that narrative in the media. Internally, we don't like to listen to the media so much. You know, you have your own system, you have your own evals. Try to make it as scientific as possible, meaning numbers and data and facts, essentially. But it's hard to comment on some of that because, of course, you can't ignore that those things do occur. And again, like, it's more of that unintentional it's almost more dangerous, where it's not meant to be malicious or unintentional, but it's just ignorance and the lack of knowledge. And so what we talked about before, having more diversity in the room can bring some of those things to attention. But in terms of like openly gay people or out people, sorry, I'm laughing at my dog. She's just growling in the background. This is like a serious topic and she's not doing this justice. But in terms of having out people in an organization, I think it's disappointing that as players, you're not comfortable being out in a locker room. That's really disappointing to me. That the environment created has been so toxic for people that you can't be who you want to be and who you are. I think in the front office, I think in these types of roles, you are more likely to be accepted. I personally have run into people of all gender orientations, sexual orientations, and I don't see a lot of you don't see a lot of it, I guess. So yes, it's still underrepresented and there's not as many people, but I think that there are roles and there are opportunity for anyone. Again, going back to being confident in your work, being qualified. If someone has a problem with that, then that's more talking on them than you.
Chris, before you respond to, since you've done a lot of actual study on this, there was a question in the chat, and I know you haven't really focused on this as far as I know, but someone also asked about religious diversity and a lack of that. I don't know if you want to share what you see from this perspective, and if you have any insight on lack or presence of religious diversity.
Yeah, I haven't looked specifically into religious diversity, although I've looked into sort of like underrepresented groups that may over-index in different areas. So, for example, we talk about like in hockey, for example, the most underrepresented group is Asians, and particularly people from India, people from of Chinese descent. Definitely like individuals of First Nations descent, and it's sort of seeing a lot of that. And I think, like, to answer that question more explicitly, I think one of the things, and I say this many times as someone who's worked in the diversity space for like the past 10 years for very large companies and trying to get that off the ground, like diversity oftentimes becomes a sort of air cover for companies not to do much. It's like, hey, we're doing things for diversity, our sport is for everyone and all of that stuff like that. But it allows companies to sort of get away with not actually making any tangible progress towards making their organizations more diverse. And so I've said many times that diversity is dead as a term of any substance. To me, something like proportionality, which says, if 15% of your population is LGBTQ, then you need to get closer to that 15% number within your organization. If 20% of your fan base is Latinx, then that's where you sort of need to lean into in terms of your hiring goals. And so I think diversity has allowed a lot of there's been a lot of good intention, bad outcomes, things that happens when it comes to diversity. But I think at the end of the day, for me, I feel like it's been an advantage because I'm used to being like the outsider in the room. I'm used to walking into a hockey conference and like I'm already going to be, an exception in here. So I might as well try to say something exceptional, because what's the worst that can happen? And because of that, I think that's afforded me the opportunity to sort of say things that, not necessarily people are afraid to say, but people are like, just aren't used to sort of thinking in those particular ways. And I can feel the comfort of saying like, I'm used to just thinking a little bit differently from everybody else and seeing it from a different lens. Let me, say that the sport of hockey is played in a very, suboptimal way from my point of view and my models and stuff. And I can, sort of lob, bombs, on Twitter and say like, we should do this or we should do that. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, that comes from a comfort that was built up over the years. I definitely will say like this, it wasn't something that happened overnight, but as I became more comfortable with myself and doing a lot more of this work and trying to open doors for other people, I realized like, this is the sort of only way you break down those barriers.
Awesome. Aaron, I asked this question with a little bit of hesitation because I am in agreement that it is those of us who are in majorities who should be doing the work, and it's not the minorities' responsibility to help us find out how to do the work. But to Chris's point, if you had advice for the individual, the fan, the person who is not in a minority group, how do we hold organizations accountable to drive the kind of diversity that Chris just described?
That's a difficult one, because that's a really difficult question, because a lot of what we do working in a front office is like ignoring what the fans are saying and like trying to tune some of that out, what the fans and the people in the media are saying about how they should be doing things. But that's something where we shouldn't. That's mostly when it comes to personnel decisions and strategic decisions that a team has to make. But if the fans and the media are upset about lack of diversity, then like that's something we do have to listen to as organizations, like, and we do have to address it. Like, yeah, why are we not seeking out a more diverse and broader pool of candidates? Why are we not hiring? Like, so it's changing that mindset of like, we know what we have to do and we can't listen to all this noise. Like, some of that noise is useful information that front offices should be taking to heart.
Sarah, any thoughts? We've talked about women specifically in the past as well, and how those who are not in a minority that needs more reception, more recognition, how can those who are in those positions of power help? What should we be asking others to do?
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. It's a tough question because, again, it's something that they know exists. Everyone knows exists, that there's a lack of diversity. It's a big hot topic. How do we change that narrative? You just start making, instead of like, let's stop talking about it. Let's have some actionable things to do. Let's what does that look like? I'm naive. I don't know. Like I don't know the answer to it. Unfortunately, I wish I could say like, it's just step 1, 2, 3, like it's so easy, but it really is just like hiring and being receptive and not putting that stereotype of, oh, she's a woman, she doesn't know sports, or treat like, oh, she got hired because she was a woman. Like, no, we're hiring. Yes, she is a woman and she's smart, or minority in this. Like, it's not part of your definition. It's just, it is like visibly who you are, but it's not something special, I guess. Like, that's not what I want to be known for. I don't want to be known as a woman in analytics. I want to be known as an analyst who changed the sport first and foremost. So I think it's just changing your perception and your idea as to like what we're doing and what you're trying, but also being aware in the back of your mind that to get to a point where that can occur, we have to start now, and you have to just start hiring more diverse people. Just do it. Just start.
Chris, before you answer too, I'll ask if maybe you'll expand your answer to not just how should we challenge organizations, but how do we challenge our fellow fan or fellow media member? We see groups like Black Girl Hockey Club. They have to make their own space because the rest of us haven't done a good enough job bringing them in. What is the challenge that we as individuals should do to an organization or to a fellow non-minority fan to help make diversity be truly represented?
Yeah, I mean that's Black Girl Hockey Club is sort of a great example. I love Renee and the work that her and the rest of the organization has done. It's been amazing just to see the impact that they have and the increasing attention that they gotten for that. I've also made it very clear that they should not be the ones sort of burdened with that task of expanding the sport of hockey for other people. They're professionals and literally a sport that benefits greatly from the efforts that Black Girl Hockey Club puts in. You see this sort of across the board with a variety of different sports, trying to get more women involved, more youth and, different backgrounds and races and nationalities. There's a lot of just sort of unpaid and unappreciated labor that goes into that. And we talk about it. And this is a conversation I've had with analysts and front office professionals across the board about the diversity tax, which is oftentimes like a lot of the burden for getting these things off the ground falls within the diverse professionals who are just trying to get their foot in the door. As Sarah said, he's like, I don't want to only be known for this. I've said this myself. Like, I don't want to come on a podcast only during February and talk about this racist incident that happened in hockey again. Like, I don't have any answers. I'm not the one doing it. So, like, can we find something else to discuss? And so I think that's part of it, where it's like, can we put pressure on our players, particularly, our, white players in these sports that have the power and the prestige to be able to affect the change in a way that even fans or individuals can't, but necessarily sort of get a free pass because they're not of this demographic, they're not this minority, they're allowed to be apolitical, and that's fine, but you can also take a stand and do the right thing every once in a while. So I think that's a part of it. The other part I quickly want to get into is that there's also certain financial aspects and opportunity pieces to it, where unpaid internships was a big point of discussion the other day. That's a key part of it, where many people of color, many women are unable to sort of take those opportunities. If you're a young parent and you have kids, the sports world is not very welcoming to you, and trying to figure out how to balance that in raising a family. So there's a lot of different aspects to it that we just need to put the pressure on the decision makers to sort of really take this seriously, because it's costing them money. Like, even if they're not doing the right thing, it is costing them billions of dollars every year. And if they're just doing it purely for capitalistic reasons, like, that is the incentive to change their entire approach to it.
I will, before we wrap, with one final question, if any of our panelists have time, there are some tremendous questions in the Q&A. If you have some time to answer those, folks, that's great. If not, we certainly want to respect your schedules. But there was a really good question here that tied into something I wanted to ask each of you before we ended. And Sarah just alluded to it. I don't want to be a woman in sports. I want to be part of, I don't want that to be a thing. How do each of you feel we balance the narrative of the first Black person to do X, the first woman to do Y, versus it not mattering? And similarly, here's the question, and I love it. Is there a better way to vet how the media covers players of different races, religions, backgrounds, etc.? It seems like sometimes the way they cover players in a way adds more of a burden to the player who may just be trying to do their job. I know front offices and the media are not connected, but the media definitely seems to have some impact on players. So Sarah, maybe you started some of this with your thoughts on being the first versus it not mattering. And then how do we address this and challenge our media to do a better job?
Yeah, so you kind of walk that double-edged sword where, like what we've talked about both, where you have people in power that are diverse, and it's good to see, and you want to bring attention to that, to promote it, to say like, hey, like, doesn't matter where you come from, where you can go where you want to go. But I do think it's a matter of like when you're, and I don't know if it's people, I don't know who it is, but again, kind of what Chris talked about, like, I'm tired of talking about being a woman in sports. I want to talk about the stuff that I do because it's cool and it's awesome and it's math and it's fun and it's nerdy and it's like, it's exciting. And so I think it's just finding that balance, and unfortunately, like the onus is on you sometimes to change the conversation. And this obviously is about diversity, so it's a different platform, but yeah, like it is on you to challenge the interviewer or to challenge the media to be like, you know what, no, like let's talk about what we're doing in the draft room. Like not that you're the woman there, like what are you doing there? Why are you there? How are you impacting the board? Just things things from your perspective where you almost have to change it, and it puts the onus back on you, yes, but sometimes, like in my opinion, like if I want to control the conversation, I'm going to control the conversation.
Aaron, what are your thoughts? I think the players in the NBA in particular have done such a phenomenal job of trying to redirect the narrative the way, if they're going to get the stage, they're going to use it to send the message that's important to them. What are your thoughts again on this first versus it not mattering? And then how do we challenge the media to cover these issues and cover the players who are unfortunately breaking barriers the proper and respectful way?
I mean, we're at a stage where in some cases, yeah, the first is meaningful, and like we should call that out sometimes, and like but with the goal of getting to the stage where it doesn't matter anymore, where it's just normal and we're not even thinking about that. This topic has come up a lot in the NBA of there's sort of a racial divide that's sort of viewed with NBA analytics, and various media members have talked about, like Jalen Rose had, a popular segment on it. Michael Wilbon talked about it. Bomani Jones has talked about it. And this idea that like analytics is a white thing and that there's no representation. But it upset me and it put me in a weird spot, because when those conversations happen, like, I feel like I want to chime in, but I also want to like do the opposite and say nothing. It's like, yeah, I mean, like, I'm a low-key guy. I don't want attention. I don't want accolades, but like maybe but how important is it that, yes, I'm the first Black director of analytics in the NBA. Like, I mean, unless you count Shane Battier, but it's kind of a unique case. But like, when I see that kind of discussion, I want to tell them, like, go out and find out who the people are. Like, there's me working in the league. Christian Wright recently been hired by the Bucks. Ben Starks is with the Clippers. Josh Estes with the Cavs. Like, we're out there and it's growing. And like, I want to put the onus on the media to find that out and just not accept it. Find out who we are, promote it so that other people can see. I've tried to do what I can, like, whether it's talking to student groups or whatever, and tell them, like, look, a lot of you are not going to be professional athletes. There's other paths to working in sports, though, like doing things like I did. And we should be promoting that instead of just accepting that or calling it, like Miles Brown said something to me the other day on Twitter that I thought was great. He said, I know that analytics is not a white thing. He said, but it has a white face. And that's what needs to change. And like, I feel some responsibility to do that myself. I also, like I said, I'm a low-key person. I don't want to put myself out there, but it's my responsibility to some extent to try to make it have less of a white face.
Awesome. Chris, the NHL may have not been the best of any of the sports at this. The mic always goes to the player of color or the woman in an issue of crisis. We'll give the closing comments to you on first versus it being accepted, and then also the challenge to the media.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, as we talked about the diversity tax, and, for players that, just want to play the game and do that, oftentimes they're not afforded the ability to. Into what Aaron and Sarah said, there's a certain, pressure to try to enable that and sort of do the work that should have been done before you got there, because of that. And I think when it comes, obviously I had a very spirited opinion about sort of diversity and analytics and sort of the whitewashing of the narrative around analytics and stuff. And I think, there's been helpful, productive discussions on both sides, but also harmful discussions. I think one of the things is, like, one of my goals has always been, I got in to hockey analytics with the goal of eventually working in hockey. And then I realized that, that might not be the most fruitful path for me personally. But if there was somebody else that, if I knew what I knew 10 years ago, I definitely would have taken a different set of opportunities. But I also think that by creating this narrative that analytics only is, white male, coming from an Ivy League school, it sort of undermines the purpose and power of analytics, but then also shuts people out. And I think there's a lot more to it that we can sort of navigate. And so I think that in terms of being the first, like, there's a sacrifice that has to be made, unfortunately, at times. But the people that do that, like, they're those pioneers that sort of kick the door open for everybody else. When it comes to the media narrative, like, yeah, we do have to be smarter. We do have to be, like, we just have to expect more out of our media and out of the people covering it to be, A, more diverse overall. That's one of the issues. And then B, more receptive to these outside opinions, because it is sort of there is just a foundation of youth and talent out there that's being untapped and under resourced. That if anybody, we're looking for people as well, like on our end that can sort of meet that need. But I think like at the end of the day, the next analyst, I would love the next like Black NBA GM to be an analytical mind like Aaron, not just a former player, or the next hockey GM or MLB GM to be a woman and all that stuff. I don't want it to be just a very rare occurrence. And so I think we're getting there, but it's still such a long road to go.
Well, thank you all so much. Again, if any of you have a few minutes to answer any of the Q&A, we would so value that, respecting your time, of course. Thank you so much for sharing your opinions and your thoughts. As each of our panelists has articulated in so many very, very smart and impactful ways, we need to do more to make every part of our world, professional, personal entertainment, look more like the world around us and not just like the people that we've known in the past. So I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We are going to take a short break. We'll be back at 2:45 with a panel on jobs outside sports teams. Again, thank you each, Chris, Aaron, and Sarah. Invaluable knowledge. Appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.